and those are in the upstream and downstream world, and they include exploration and production, refining and chemicals, gas and power, marketing and services, trading, and renewables. And a lot of these matters, they range from deal work to compliance and disputes, with a good number being cross-border or international in nature. She leads a team of approximately 40 legal professionals, including attorneys, paralegals, compliance personnel, and administrative staff. Elizabeth also chairs Total US's Ethics Committee and the US Women's Network. Before joining Total, Elizabeth was a member of the legal team at Chevron, where she worked in a large number of different business units, including global downstream, corporation law, energy technology, and global drilling and completions. Elizabeth started her legal career as a federal clerk for the US District Court of Philadelphia, and then she moved to DC, where she worked for two major law firms. Elizabeth graduated from Yale with an undergrad degree in humanities and history, and she got her JD from Harvard Law School. Outside of Total, Elizabeth is a board member of the Texas General Counsel Forum, the World Affairs Council of Houston, and the Harvard Law School Club of Houston. She also serves as the national advisor. She also serves on the National Advisory Council and is a past president of the Women's Energy Network. She is also a past president of the American Petroleum Labor Lawyers Association and currently a member of the Association of Corporate Counsel. In the community, Elizabeth is actively involved, and she is the founder and past president of the Texas Sage chapter of the National Charity League, and she is also a board member of the American Hospital of Paris Foundation. And with that, I'd like to give a warm welcome to Elizabeth and hand it back over to Seepan.
All right, thanks, Dan, and welcome, Elizabeth. And to all of you who joined us for today, I'd just like to let you know that Elizabeth has graciously agreed to answer any questions that may be fielded. And so if you do have questions at any point, please do use the chat feature at the bottom of your screen on Zoom to submit a question. Either to, you could just submit it to me privately, and I'll collect them, and that we could then pose those questions to Elizabeth as appropriate, either at the end or throughout the conversation, depending on what the topic is. So with that, Elizabeth, I'd like to kick off with somewhat of a retrospective now that we're in 2021, and ask you what have been some of Total's challenges, and particularly your challenges that you've encountered in the year 2020. Certainly COVID is obviously one of them, and how you guys have tackled that. But with COVID and otherwise, be curious to know what challenges you all faced in 2020.
Sure. So obviously, like many folks, our biggest challenge was dealing with COVID. The foremost challenge was ensuring the well-being of all of our employees and personnel, and then also making sure that we continue to operate as smoothly as possible, because many of our operations, and particularly our petrochemical plants, are considered critical infrastructure. And so it was really important to us, and of course to our communities, that we kept those operations going. And then in addition to COVID, as y'all know, it was a significant year for geopolitical events. Those events had a big effect on our energy industry, both in terms of supply and demand, but also in terms of stability. So for example, in Mozambique, we had to deal with a number of militant actions. And then also in terms of geopolitics, just issues such as climate change and the initiatives that come with that.
All right, and we'll get to the climate change piece in a bit. So in particular, let's talk about the geopolitical challenges, let's say, that you've dealt with, and militant issues in Mozambique, for example. How do you go about dealing with a challenge like that when it comes across your desk?
Sure. So our legal team has been very busy trying to deal with all these challenges. In terms of COVID, we really benefited from our great IT infrastructure. We already had in place before COVID hit really excellent remote working capabilities, but we hadn't really been using them fully. And of course, COVID pushed us to get really good at those really quickly. We also have been moving forward for many years globally at Total on digitalization. And so for our part in legal, we've been adopting as quickly as we can technology solutions such as e-signature, moving to totally paperless transactions, and also using AI to see how we can facilitate daily tasks. And then, we've changed our work schedules, of course, with COVID. Our clients have mostly been working from home, and we have too. And we're trying to, of course, continue to provide excellent legal services and respond to the needs of our business and maintain business continuity. But we've been able to do that very effectively working remotely. And then, of course, COVID had a big impact in terms of the budget. We've been very proactive in helping our businesses renegotiate fee structures with our partners and suppliers and vendors. And even the legal team has taken back some work in-house that we traditionally perhaps would have sent to outside counsel.
Would you agree that, one of the positives of perhaps COVID, if we can term it that, has been, for example, this motivation to wanting to make arbitrations remote and, reduce costs related to that, or depositions taken remotely. So reducing the cost of travel, for example, for counsel. Have you seen any positives related to the adaptations that you all have had to make during COVID?
Absolutely. I mean, we really have learned how to do arbitrations, investigations, transactions virtually and without being in person. Sometimes, I think particularly on the transactional side, it slows things down. But it's amazing how much you can do virtually. And I think that some of these learnings will carry with us even when we get past COVID.
Right. And I actually want to ask you, that's a great segue, because that was going to be my next question, is which of these kind of new kind of the ways you've adapted and how you've implemented them, which ones of those do you think are going to stay along for the ride after COVID hopefully resolves soon?
Sure. Well, I suspect that we will continue to have much more flexible work schedules. At our company, we've been looking at, now that we've had the experience of COVID and realized that most people can be extremely effective working remotely. How do we change our expectations for being in the office to permit more flexible work, more days working from home or working somewhere other than the office? And then I think while it's still important to have in-person communications, I do think we'll probably travel less and we'll find ways to do more via Zoom or teleconference. So there's some good and positive things that will come out of the situation.
Sure. And for those who have joined us who may be outside counsel, what kinds of recommendations may you have for them in terms of what how your needs have changed in your relationships with your outside counsel?
Sure. Certainly the most important needs for us have not changed, just in terms of expecting outside counsel to provide excellent, cost-effective legal support, to know our businesses, to be good partners. But I think in these times where we're remote and under so much both time and cost pressure, the outside counsel that can really think about what we need. I guess as an example, I had outside counsel reach out to us for help with what the quarantine laws were in different states when COVID hit. And that was just really helpful because those are things we don't have time to look up. And if outside counsel can be proactive in helping us with what we need, it's very much appreciated.
Understood. So you also mentioned climate change as one of the challenges for 2020, and obviously, just recently, General Motors, for example, they announced that they want to be carbon neutral and all tailpipe emitting vehicles by 2035, I believe, and all factories by 2030 that will be all transition to renewable energy at that point. And obviously, the Biden administration coming in on day one, they rejoined the Paris Accords. So clearly, climate change is at the forefront of what's going on in this country this year. And so, how has Total dealt? How has Total dealt with the dynamism in climate change issues, and where does Total see itself in how climate change is dealt with going forward?
Sure. Well, I think that Total and led by our very forward-looking CEO, Patrick Pouyanné, has really thought about how we can be a part of the world in a responsible way with an eye toward climate change. Patrick has said, Total does not want to be a dinosaur. We don't want to be left behind. So we need to evolve. And so our 20-year ambition is to become the responsible energy major. And it's focused on the word "the" because it's our goal to lead the way in providing energy that's affordable, reliable, and cleaner. So of course, energy, if it's not affordable, it's not good to most people in the world. It has to be affordable and it has to be reliable, which is a challenge sometimes with renewables because they're intermittent. And also it has to be cleaner. And so what we're focusing on is really being carbon neutral by 2050. And we're going to focus on renewables. You've probably read about some of our recent solar acquisitions in the US. And then also focusing on increasing our efficiency at our facilities and decreasing emissions. So we're working on all areas of climate in that regard. And in conjunction with that, we're really walking the walk. We just politely withdrew from API this year. And it's a result of some of the differences we had on positions about the role of natural gas or subsidies for electric vehicles, carbon pricing, or the US's participation in the Paris Agreement. So we're really moving forward, I would say, responsibly, but also aggressively to address climate change and to change our business.
And so on that note, I mean, what are some of the legal aspects of that, of that move towards that carbon neutral kind of future, and that that you just painted for Total? How does that look for you? Like, what's on your plate on a daily basis when it comes to implementing these climate change initiatives?
Well, the legal team is rapidly learning how to be renewables attorneys. And we've been instrumental in the deal work surrounding renewables and alternative energy. So, we've been doing a lot of, as I mentioned, M&A here in the U.S. recently in terms of solar, and I suspect probably more to come as we continue to grow. And we're also involved in the R&D. I think all of the companies in the energy space are trying to figure out, both how are we successful in renewables, but also how do we capture carbon, and what's the most effective way to do that. So we've been working on R&D in that space. And we're also, of course, looking at regulations about climate change and making sure that, we are up to speed and compliant with not only the regulations from this past administration, but also regulations that may be coming under the current administration. And, we work hand in hand with Paris on these issues. Of course, the Europeans have a different view of climate, and as a European company, we have really been pushing hard to address climate issues.
Have you seen that? I mean, can you explain more about what those differences might be in the way the European outlook is, and how that translates on the US side for Total?
Sure. Well, the European regulations, I think, are, at least compared to what we've seen under the more recent US administrations, are just much stricter in terms of emissions, in terms of requirements for changing to more carbon neutrality. And so we're working to, we're trying to follow all of those regulations and to move as a European company. But of course, as a US company, we're following those as well. So I think we're very, very well positioned as we move into this more low carbon future.
All right. And what are some of the Biden administration's, regulations in this space that you anticipate, having to deal with in the coming months?
Sure. Well, not, of course, I don't know what's coming, but
Right.
Certainly there will be, I assume we're going to see regulations coming out of the EPA, restrictions on drilling in federal lands. There'll be regulations, I suspect, in the labor and employment front. So all of those areas we're going to have to be active and up to speed on.
Got it. And so looking forward also to this year, Elizabeth, what are some of the challenges that you're anticipating having to deal with, coming up in the next month, in the next several months?
Well, unfortunately, we haven't gotten past COVID. I was hoping that in 2021 we'd be able to focus on things other than COVID, but we're still spending a lot of time on COVID-related issues. Of course, we have operations in the U.S. in many different states, and we're trying to understand what are the quarantine regulations there, what are the vaccine policies, and what are the legal policies regarding vaccines. We're assessing where, is it permissible to make vaccines mandatory? Do we want to do that? How do we properly reopen our offices and when? What types of safety guards do we need to have to reopen offices? And how do we stage those reopenings? Right now, as I think we were probably talking about before we opened up the call, at our downtown office in Houston, we have a capacity cap. So some people are going back to the office, and we've tremendously changed the way the office is configured to make it safe for people to come back. And we have temperature checks at the, when you get in the entrance, only a certain number of people are allowed on the elevator. There's plastic dividers up, especially on the training floors where people tend to be seated close to each other. So we've really reassessed how the office is set up to try and make it safer. And we'll have to continue to do that as we bring more people back once the situation improves.
Okay. And what about non-COVID related? Any challenges you're foreseeing this year, or opportunities as well? Let's not keep it the challenges.
That's right. Yeah. Challenges and opportunities.
Yeah.
So, I think it's very exciting to see this new administration because it aligns with a lot of the changes that we are making in terms of moving toward being a better energy company and being responsible and having less of an impact on the planet. So it's exciting to learn about, as a lawyer, to learn about the solar deals, to pursue those, and then also looking into other forms of renewable energy. We're really looking across the spectrum at biofuels, at offshore wind, and then also on more of the downstream side, we're looking at recycling, looking at chemical recycling. How do we make biopolymers? So like those, all of the kind of plastics that you use and you throw away, the single-use plastics, how do we make those out of biofuels, or how do we recycle them so there's less of an impact on the planet? And then also, obviously, as I mentioned earlier, with the new administration, they're coming out with a lot of regulations that we're going to have to keep up with and make sure on the environmental side, on labor and employment, and then also even on issues like data privacy. Are we compliant with all of those regulations?
And actually, since data privacy has been, at the forefront of, it's certainly on the forefront of a lot of companies' minds, with data breaches making the news all the time and all that, on data privacy in particular, what keeps you up at night on that particular issue?
Well, one thing that keeps me up at night is that the European rules on data privacy are much stricter than the US laws. We're not in general a B2C business. I mean, we do have gas stations, but we don't have a lot of customer data, unlike some other companies that have had data breaches. But for us, my concern is how strict the European data privacy laws are. And in the US, I think we don't have the same type of strict laws. So just making sure that we comply with those laws is a little bit difficult. And of course, we're trying to put in place the proper procedures and rules to ensure that we do so. But it's difficult sometimes when you have data coming back and forth between the US and Europe, and data that would be perfectly permissible and doesn't need any real privacy restraints here. If it's European data, like about a European citizen, it does. So just trying to make sure we don't step in any holes as we're dealing with that data going back and forth.
Got it. And I think this is something, that we've hinted at least, with Total, having the European DNA in it, and but you guys are operating in the U.S. So what are some challenges that you think are unique to Total here in the U.S. that you guys are facing?
So, I don't know if it's unique to Total, but obviously we're a global company with the headquarters in Paris, and we need to be aware and, of course, compliant with all U.S. regulations, but also working hand in hand with our European colleagues. So it's just a matter of making sure that we're doing what we need to in the U.S., but also keeping into account European laws, which at times, especially on things like renewables, may be moving faster than we are in the U.S. And then also, this is just a general issue for any global company, but taking into account any kind of geographic or cultural or language sensibilities. I mean, we work with people from all over the world, and we have to be aware of those sensitivities and make sure that whatever we're doing, whether it's litigation or negotiating a deal, that we're respectful of those cultures.
And that's actually a good segue into one of the questions that was just posed by one of our members here. And it's been a topic in previous discussions that we've had here at the International Law section regarding US-China relations. And especially in Houston, having seen the shutdown of the Chinese consulate during the, what we'll call the trade wars with China that the Trump administration took up. How has the relationship between the U.S. and China sort of affected, what you've been doing, if at all, especially being here in Houston?
Sure. I haven't seen a tremendous change in our business there. In terms of because of the U.S. relationship. Mm-hmm. What I have seen a change in is because of environmental concerns. For example, we were working on a coal to olefins project, I guess the year before last, and then because of our commitment to low carbon and to addressing climate change. Even though it was a great project, we decided that it wasn't consistent with what we wanted to be as a company, and so we pulled out of that. So I think to the extent that there might be other countries that are, I know China is really moving forward aggressively in renewable, so I wouldn't necessarily say this is true of China, but to the extent that other countries are not aligned with our vision of being a responsible energy major, then we may not be, moving forward with projects there.
Got it. And do you see an initiative at all like that Total has with various countries to try to get them on board with what Total's goals are in either in the environmental space at least, and to get their regulations domestically in harmony with what your practices are?
Well, we're not really trying to influence their domestic regulations, but I do think that most countries are on a similar path in terms of wanting to move forward to a more, carbon sensitive or, climate sensitive policies. But you have to keep in mind that energy needs to be affordable as well. So it may be easier for the US or Europe to put in place environmental regulations. It may be more difficult if you're a very poor country that doesn't have reliable or inexpensive energy. So, I think everyone is trying to move forward in a more responsible way, but the energy has to be affordable and it has to be reliable. And without those two things, it's not going to work.
Got it. So I have here, another question. This relates more to litigation, and the question is if you could break down what the litigation docket looks like at Total, and where you see the most emphasis being placed in litigation right now.
I'm smiling because I'm close to turning this question over to Tan. I'll give you my thoughts, but Tan probably has a better answer, or more accurate answer than I do.
Don't mute, Tan.
So for the U.S. litigation docket, we actually just had a meeting this morning to go over what our litigation looked like in 2020. So I have a pretty good sense from a high level. A lot of it is actually environmental litigation or toxic tort, largely stemming from operations, many years ago, 50 years ago, say, at our various sites. We also have some commercial litigation, although not a lot. Some plaintiff side litigation as well. Tan, what else? I've turned over to you.
Yeah, Tan, and actually, but before you go ahead and answer that, and if you could also just explain what your daily, work looks like on the litigation side.
Sure. So I completely agree with Elizabeth. A lot of our lawsuits are chemical exposure, toxic torts, and those tend to be from our legacy operations. Some of them we've inherited. So we've inherited the sins of our predecessors, if you will, through different transactions. Daily operations for me mainly involve sometimes herding cats, it feels like. We're obviously a big organization, so reaching out to a lot of our different business folks and getting their input on certain pieces of our lawsuits. A good chunk of the day is also spent on strategy, talking through with Elizabeth on how we want to deal with cases, what are not only the implications of a certain case, but where do we see the trajectory for a lot of these types of cases. And then, spending a lot of time with external counsel and making sure that our strategy is implemented, making sure that we are not missing anything, talking to our external counsel to make sure that they've got our blind spots in check, because we don't know what we don't know, and so that's a lot of valuable input that we receive.
Thank you very much for that, Tan. And that kind of brought up a question in my mind that I'd like to pose to you guys. Especially with COVID, have you guys had a change in heart on whether you prefer arbitration to litigation in state courts or federal courts more? Especially because of COVID and jury trials, especially, and trials in general being pushed out and being delayed, and that may delay resolution of matters for you guys. How's that changed things for you?
I'll turn it over to you, Tan.
I'll give the typical lawyer answer of it depends, and it really does depend. It's so dependent upon what the dispute is about, who the dispute is with. Obviously, we're comfortable doing both, lawsuits as well as arbitrations. There are obviously pros and cons to both. We have a healthy docket of both lawsuits in state and federal, as well as arbitrations, domestic and international. So we're not a stranger to them. I think, at this point, I don't even know what a federal court trial looks like anymore, only because everything has been pushed out so far. A lot of our dockets, federal dockets, have been pushed out to the extent that we have no idea when federal trials are going to be. State court, knock on wood, we haven't had to go through a trial yet, but I hear that it is interesting to go through a trial, either in a big convention center or virtually. So we'll let others forge that path before we have to go down that route.
Got it.
Yeah, I think there's sort of the view that big corporations prefer arbitration because it's more predictable or more fair. I haven't always found that to be the case. So I think Tan's 100% right. It depends. Sometimes I like arbitration better, but sometimes I'd rather be in court. Especially on some of our plaintiff side cases. Sure.
Okay. And I know that we addressed COVID earlier, Elizabeth, but we also had a question here on the challenges that your legal department specifically has faced in dealing with COVID, especially on how to stay integrated with clients, for example.
Sure. So, I think that the initial challenge when we all went home was how do you keep the same relationships with clients when you're used to just being on the same hall with them, popping your head in the door. You know, there's a lot to be said to overhearing client concerns at the coffee bar. But really, you know, I think the structure of our legal department helps. We have teams of lawyers who are dedicated to certain types of clients. So, for example, our refining and chemicals business, we have lawyers who are dedicated to that business. Same for the exploration and production business. So those lawyers are talking with their clients. We usually use Teams, but, you know, they're talking to them on video conference every day, all day. You know, I think the key is just continuing to have that close relationship with them. And really, that's one learning from COVID is that I really felt like we didn't miss a beat in terms of our client relationships. We do as an internal law firm, we have clients, and we do a client satisfaction survey every year. And I was really pleased that this year, when we did that survey, our clients actually, our results rose this year as compared to last. So our clients are even happier with our services this year than in the past, which I think is a huge tribute to our team.
Wow. And I'll just add, you know, Elizabeth is absolutely correct that, you know, our business folks, they're our clients. So nothing has really changed in terms of private practice and in-house. You're still developing clients, but it's assuring your business clients that you will always be there for them, and accessibility is not going to be an issue.
And I think, in fact, I mean, this is not always a great thing in terms of work-life balance, but because everyone is sort of stuck at home, I know that our clients contact us at all hours of the day, and probably because they know you're always accessible, they might contact you, you know, very late at night or on a weekend, and probably with fewer barriers to doing that now than they used to.
Right.
On a funny note, a lot of my clients, especially, you know, overseas, they've got to know what my home office looks like. They've gotten to know my dog very well.
I was going to say that they'll know your pets' names very soon. Yeah. Okay. Well, Elizabeth, what developments? Let's go specific to Texas. What have there been any developments in Texas case law, or, you know, any opinions that have come out or regulations that the state has passed that has caught your attention and is going to be something that you focus on in 2021?
Well, I think the things that we are most focused on in Texas are really the environmental regulations, because, you know, as Tan said, a lot of our potential exposure is related to our, you know, environmental impacts. So that's my biggest focus, is just keeping an eye on that. I mean, of course, we're likely to see changes maybe more at the federal level first than in Texas, but those are the biggest concerns for me. Dan, feel free to jump in if you have.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. You know, a lot of what we try to anticipate is how Texas is going to react to different federal laws, federal regulations, because as you know, each state reacts differently to federal regulations, and so that's something that is always on the top of mind for us.
Understood. Okay, and we have a question here. So on the M&A side, Elizabeth, in 2021, do you foresee busy activity there again in acquiring or having partnerships with renewable energies that you mentioned the solar earlier? Is that going to be something that you continue to focus on in 2021?
Right. I mean, I think if you look at the direction that Total is headed, and if you read the public statements that our CEO has made, I mean, it's clear that we're going to be putting our money where our mouth is, and to the extent that, of course, we're still very much in a cost constrained environment, and the reason our balance sheet is good is because we've been so careful with costs. But in terms of where we put our M&A dollars, we're going to be looking to shift, to help continue this shift toward renewable. So I would expect to see more deals in that area.
What's a area of legal need that that you think so far Total maybe hasn't met particularly, or you could use additional legal staff for, or is there anything like that where you feel like there's some kind of insufficiency that you'd like to kind of patch up or bolster in 2021?
I'm sure Tan would probably agree with this comment, but the biggest need that we have is really just for people. We, as I mentioned before, we've really tried to be very careful in terms of our cost control. And we haven't really, Total has not done any large scale layoffs, unlike many other companies. I'm sure you've read about them. But the downside of it is that we operate on a very, very lean team. And so that's my and I think everyone on the team's challenge is just how do you get all this work done, and some of it growing perimeter of work with the same number of people. So we're always stretched. We're always, for those of you that are outside counsel, we're always looking for good partnerships. We sometimes bring on secundees from law firms to learn at a low price for us. It's just trying to get everything done.
Right. Okay. Dan, did you want to comment on that, or you just agree there?
I completely agree. And just to further add to what Elizabeth said, the hardest thing is to actually learn our business, because we do so much here, and I'm still learning. I've been here for almost 2 years now, and I still don't know the entire scope of our business and exactly who does what. So it is very important to get to know our business.
Okay, we have a question just came in here. So on intellectual property, Elizabeth, I think you mentioned earlier about R&D becoming, being an important area for you guys. And so what's been, sorry, the question's still being typed. Oh, okay. So what's been the focus for Total in the intellectual property sphere, especially in light of the Alice case a few years ago, that made venue in Eastern District not as favorable?
The biggest focus for us, and I'm not an IP attorney, obviously, but our IP attorney is very busy in working with our M&A lawyers as we pursue opportunities, and especially in this renewable / recycling space. We're trying to figure out how do we get into these different areas, which ones are the right ones to be in, when do we want to try and develop technology in these areas, and when is it better just to acquire a company, because we're not the experts perhaps in developing certain technology. It may be better to do it by acquisition. So our IP lawyers are critical for that strategy, and just really paired hand in hand with the M&A lawyers.
Okay. Will, Tan, have you had any involvement on the IP litigation side?
Thankfully, very limited.
Okay.
So we tend to keep our nose clean in terms of IP infringement.
All right. Well, good for you. So here's another question for you, Elizabeth. Beyond this year, what long-term changes, i.e. 5 to 10 years, do you see happening for in-house legal departments?
Well, I think what I've seen in the past 10 years, I think, is a continued trend toward in-house lawyers, sort of a high grading of the in-house legal function, in-house lawyers really being seen as critical business partners. And then also more and more, I'm seeing our clients tapping in-house lawyers for non-legal functions. So, yesterday I had our CFO was asking me about whether the lawyers might want to move over to finance and do some functions there. I'm seeing lawyers move into business roles. So really just the growth of the significance of the in-house legal team, but also the recognition maybe of the flexibility of a legal degree and the learnings that you come with being a lawyer, and the things you might be able to contribute with it, even outside of law.
Okay. In here we have another question, and I like these questions that are plugging our prior events. All right, so this one is about artificial intelligence, and we did have a talk last November, I believe it was, on the role of AI in international arbitration. And so this question is, how has Total incorporated AI, if at all, in resolution of disputes, as well as, and I'll add on to this, your legal services in general?
Sure. So, the way I've seen AI mostly used to date in Total is kind of assessing outside counsel spend and efficacy. We haven't used it as much in resolution of disputes, although Tan, you can please jump in. I'm always interested in talking to there are a few law firms I think that have really led in the AI space, and I'm always enjoying talking to them to see what they might have to offer. I know there's some great AI contract tools and others that we might consider, but we haven't yet found what I thought was the one that we would want to implement.
Okay.
In other words, I think AI has a lot of promise, but I don't know that it's fully baked yet for us.
Tan, have you had any experience with AI in your practice?
Generally, it is highly dependent upon what our external counsel offers. And so, again, as Elizabeth said, it's probably not at the stage where we would fully adopt AI as a technology on a go-forward basis. But in terms of some of your, your more, I guess, more simple functions, then yeah, if you have AI that can help you out on document discovery, great. We're all for that, because nobody wants to sit through millions of pages of documents, nor do we want to pay for that. But for higher functions, I think Elizabeth is absolutely right. We just got to wait and see how that technology plays out.
Okay. And by the way, folks, if you have more questions, please let me know. We're on the last question here, Elizabeth, at least for now, from our folks, participants who have joined us. And this one asks the following: what problem spots do you see in the world for where Total operates from a legal perspective?
Oh, wow. There are probably lots of them. I mean, there are, I mentioned Mozambique earlier, not to pick on Mozambique, but there are many countries where we operate where it's difficult to operate politically, where the security situations are not good, and it's difficult to keep our people safe. Just difficult to do our work. Those are difficult, obviously. I think just general geopolitical instability. It's a lot of our businesses are long-term, very expensive commitments to countries, and so it's difficult to make a decision to be in a country if you don't have confidence that your investment is going to make sense in the long term. So I think geopolitics is really key for us, and of course, at the very basics, like safety and security of our people.
Right. And does Total have geopolitical analysts whose job is to assess these types of threats and to forecast them for the future, or is that something that the legal department needs to handle, or whose lap does that fall on?
Right. We have a variety of different functions that do that. For example, we have a DC office. I was just talking to someone at our DC office today, and they're looking at the geopolitics that impact not only our U.S. operations, but also our international operations. And of course, more from a political perspective. From more of a security perspective, we have a whole security function that looks at the safety and security of different countries and where and how we can safely do business. So yeah, we have a as a global company that operates in some countries that are very difficult to do business in. We have a lot of people dedicated to that.
Got it. All right, and we do have one more question that came in. And did the riots in the Capitol building now, I guess, 2 weeks ago, has that affected your relationships with your partners abroad in any way? Other than maybe some jokes here and there.
Yeah.
Some
I think that most of our European colleagues, I think, were really shocked and saddened about those events. I think that people recognize that the U.S. is a very strong country, and that that's not who we are. I don't think it's affected any long-term relationships, but certainly, people were very saddened about it for us.
Got it. Okay. And Elizabeth, I think before we wrap up here today, do you have any, parting thoughts for, those joining us in the international law section on, well, actually, on that point of international law, and I know Tan mentioned that you're on the board of the World Affairs Council. We have had a theme this year in our international law section on Houston as a global city and the prominence that Houston has on the international, stage. And so I was wondering if you could speak to that on where you think Houston as a city is going in terms of its global prominence and where Total fits into that picture.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, Total obviously is, and I know many of our other peer companies in Houston are moving toward more renewables, more green energy, more technology focused industry, which I think is great, because my personal view is that Houston also needs to pivot in that way. I don't know that being an oil and gas city is where we want to be in 20 years. So I think if we want to attract the kind of talent that we want in the businesses to Houston, we do need to pivot. And, I think Total is right in there doing this pivot. So I suspect that, many other companies in Houston will do so. And, hopefully we'll be able to attract the kind of businesses and talent to Houston that we can.
And do you see the immigration policies that the Biden administration is, looking to implement? Do you see that as helping attract that type of talent?
I think so. Certainly, if you look at a company like Total or many of our peer companies, we're strong because of our diversity and inclusion, and we have people from all over the world working together to be successful in our business. So, I think to the extent that the immigration policies can continue to bring in great, talented people, then it's a great thing.
Sure. Okay. All right. And on that note, I just want to, I think we'll end a little early. No other questions from our audience. So I hope everyone enjoyed that. And Elizabeth, thank you very, very much for your time. I really appreciate it. And have a nice weekend. And folks who have joined us, we have another a virtual panel coming up soon on anti-corruption compliance initiatives in Latin America, and that's going to be in mid-February. And so we hope to see you there as well. So thank you again, Elizabeth, for your time, and take care, everyone, and have a nice weekend.
Thank you. You too. Thanks to both you and Tan.
Thank you, Tan.